Would like to ask Dobrev to make his presentation about human activities can hinder the breeding of a top avian predator.
Good day, everybody. My name is Dobrev of the Bulgarian Society for the Protection of Birds. Thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to be here. Today, I'm going to speak about a study that we have been undertaking for years, for more than 10 years. And unfortunately, we have published just a small part of it. So we are going hopefully to have the rest of the data soon or in the near future. So anyway, as you can see, we have just published a paper 2 years ago, and it concerns only 2 years period. The study was conducted in the southeast of Bulgaria in Sakar Mountains, and I'll give more details in a while, but generally our study was inspired by a Spanish research that was done for the Spanish Imperial Eagle. And along this study, there were some nice and how to say fruitful scientific disputes. So we were really inspired to somehow repeat and see what is the situation regarding the effect of human activities in Bulgaria as well. But as I mentioned earlier, we were just able to analyze just a small portion of the data we have collected so far, because in another study, we have actually analyzed the results of the nest guarding that we are also conducting in Bulgaria. And as you can see up there, we have been collecting data since 2001. And we have so far collected data over 47 breeding attempts. These are mostly nests that have been in risky areas or areas that were subject to more intense human pressure during the years. And finally, we could say that the guarded pairs had a higher mean breeding success in comparison to the pairs that were not guarded at that time. And we believe that this activity is truly important for very fragile and small populations, and could really be very important for increasing the breeding success to some extent, although not statistically significant according to our data. And therefore, the objectives of our study were to reveal the most common human activities and their magnitude in the Imperial Eagle territories we were surveying, but also to define and measure eagles' reaction, and finally to suggest primary conservation measures that might be really important at a local scale or at individual scale, because some pairs, they need, some of the pairs need more attention than others, for sure. And finally, we monitored in this study only 3 breeding attempts of breeding pairs in this mountain range in the southeast. But we had our observation throughout the day for a period between 7 and 8. This is the, during the daylight. And we had included 67 monitoring days in our research. And we were collecting the data from a vantage point that was always like around 1 kilometer away of the nest, so that we not provoke eagles, or we don't have an effect on the reactions of the eagles whenever such activity occurs within the territory. Observations cover the breeding season of the eagles. This means between April and July, when the fledging occurs. And for each breeding attempt, we differentiated 2 periods. The first one is the incubation, which includes the period from the laying of the first egg until hatching. And the second period included the chick rearing phase. This is since the hatching of the first egg until fledging of the chicks. So in the frame of this study, we recorded the following information whenever we were at the field. We recorded the type and the duration of the activity. We got also the linear distance to the nest. We also registered the number of people or vehicles that were involved in the activity. And finally, and most importantly, we reported the eagle's reactions. We classified all these stuff into different categories, but most importantly, the reaction of the birds was categorized into 3 categories. The first one is no reaction. This means that the eagles were not alerted, and the second one was a alarm reaction. Whenever we saw any alarming reaction by the birds whenever such activity occurred within their territory. This might include different situations, but mainly in these scenarios, birds easily get alarmed and they got very cautious whenever something happens around. And unfortunately, there is always a flight reaction, which means that the birds are scared of their nest within the breeding or the chick rearing period. And we used ANOVA and breakdown in one way ANOVA actually analysis to study the effect of different human activities. And the most important here is to say that we set the reaction of the birds as a dependent variable of all these other variables that were mentioned above, and you can read beneath. And of course, all tests were considered significant whenever we got the P below 0.05. And so what are the results so far? We spent nearly 700 hours of observations for these 2 nests, and we recorded in total 375 cases of different types of human activities. This included, imagine, mainly either local people that were trespassing the territories or some machinery or other vehicles that might be around. And the majority of the activities were recorded during the chick rearing season, which is rather normal because this is normally the period when people are actually managing their crops. So you can see easily many people around. And we recorded actually that the most common activities around the studied nest were the trespassing of light vehicles. This included mainly cars and motorcycles in 26% of the cases, but also presence of many local people, mainly shepherds, that are taking care after their livestock in these areas, and also non-mechanized vehicles. This included many carriages. So in the majority of the cases, we could not record any reactions of the eagles. However, in 40 cases, we recorded signs of alarming reactions. And in 22 cases, the eagles left actually the nest after being interrupted by such human activities. And we found out that the probability of reaction in the imperial eagle is dependent on the type of the activity, on the distance from the nest, and the duration of the activity. Finally, there is a graph here. You can, yeah, it's much easier to navigate, but anyway, you can see that the majority of the reactions occurred within this distance belt, and this is why we consider a minimum of 300 meters of distance of any human activities from the nest might lead to either alarming or either flight reactions by the eagle. So we suggest in our paper that a minimum of 500 meters should be kept as a distance where eagles might feel safe, and of course where human activities should be or might be restricted to some extent. We have discussed widely this in the discussion, but you will find there that there are some different or similar measures proposed either for the golden or imperial eagle in Spain, and you can easily find more details and search over our paper or the reference that we have pointed out inside. Finally, of course, more extensive research on this topic is needed because if you remember our slide 3, you could see that we have only investigated 3 out of 47 cases of nest guarding. So we hope that we are going to be able to analyze the rest of the data and finally have a more pronounced or more robust estimation in terms of the human activities and their effect on the breeding of the species. And of course, I would like to thank to some of the people that were deeply involved in collecting this data, and tens of others that we didn't point out here. And I hope we are going to see them soon along our next paper published. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dobry. And any questions? In the back.
Sorry.
Did you see any abandonment of the nest because of the human activities? Any nesting breeding pairs left the nesting territory because of the high disturbance level?
Yeah, thanks. Fortunately, we did not observe any abandonment of nest, but according to our data, because we are still collecting some, we know that it's crucial for some of the nests to be guarded intensively, especially those that are situated very close to human settlements or are subject to like intensively trespassing people and vehicles as well.
Thank you.
Maybe rather an annotation than a question. I think we've made the experience that disturbance often affects the eagle in combination with other factors. So in seasons with very bad weather conditions during incubation period, they are much more affected by disturbing events, of course.
Yeah, surely. That's why we hope to have our data collected and actually analyzed in this long term, because we would be able to set more variables and of course to test other hypotheses as well. That would be truly interesting actually and very important, I think.
Yes, Andrew.
Do the birds get used to regular disturbance by the same people? So a shepherd who's constantly in the area, do the birds' reactions change after a while because they become familiar with this?
Yes, definitely. I didn't go into much detail so that I was not boring you, but just you can check out in our paper. But anyway, we surely see that eagles get really accustomed to local people like shepherds, and sometimes they might be like standing under the nest and eagles would not react. But if I go closer, like less than 1,000 or 800 meters, they would immediately leave the nest. So they really get acquainted to local people and to regular activities that they know and they recognize.
I would also add a comment to this. As you know, also in this Spanish paper raised some concerns afterwards. So it is important to mention that there are two sides of any kind of regulations. So, for example, if you would like to keep the local people out from a 500-meter zone of the nest, it could raise conflicts and it could raise to persecution, for example, in the long term. And also, as you mentioned, the eagles can get quite good accustomed to the regular disturbance. So maybe in your point with this tiny population, it could be a conservation measure. But in a long term, for example, in Hungary, we absolutely stopped all kind of regulations around the nests because we saw that sometimes, of course, it can cause breeding failure, but in most of the cases, the eagles get accustomed and even they can breed successfully next to dirt roads or even close to villages after some years of experience.
Yeah, of course. And this is why I put also the two papers mentioned. And I think this is very important to underline and also to consider as well. So really important.
Thank you. Matthias, one last question and before the coffee break.
question more to you, Martin. You mentioned you stopped doing a regulation around the nests. That means also for forestry. You have in Hungary no restriction for forestry during the breeding season, for example?
Yes, the forests are different issue. In the forest, also those very few breeding pairs which are in the forest, they are more sensitive than the ones in the lowlands. And but the restrictions in the forests are mostly for the maintenance of the nest sites in the long term. But also in those areas where we have not just imperial eagles, but lesser spotted eagles or short-toothed eagles, and then the local national parks are used the restrictions for the forestry works absolutely actively. So in the forest region, it is still applied, but in the lowlands, which are open habitats, then we are not applying it.
Okay, thanks.